So then I'm starting. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third webinar in our craft series. And today we are talking about biophysical research and Arctic infrastructure. So this project is Craft Research Coordination Network that was initiated together by NNA Community Office Convergence Working Group Infrastructure Futures, then RATIC initiative, which is Rapid Arctic Transitions Due to Infrastructure and Climate Change, and in collaboration with Orat Native Council in Bethel, Alaska, and Native Village of Mekarik. Together, we are working to develop this project called Co-Creating Research for Just Arctic Future Infrastructure Transformations, Resilience, and Adaptation. We have a lot of universities and stakeholders involved, and we are aiming to bring as many perspectives as possible to infrastructure research and how it should be developed in the future. Next slide. So our webinars take place every month at 9 a.m. Alaska time, 1 p.m. Washington, D.C. time. And today is exceptional, the second week of the month. But yeah, please join us and watch our webinars whenever it's possible. We hope that we will be able to solve problem with Facebook because we really want to reach out to remote communities, and in Facebook it would be much easier than on Zoom. So we keep trying. So, and today's webinar is led by Victoria Miles, and our panelists today are Rebekah Arnold, Howard Epstein, and David Fuente. So, next slide. So every participant, so we are constantly evolving, and this webinar today will be started by Victoria presenting herself and then introducing panelists, and Victoria will ask questions for starting our conversation, and every panelist will have about 10 minutes to respond to those questions, and then we will open for discussion, questions and answers. Okay. So, Victoria, floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. My name is Victoria Miles, and I'm a researcher at Nansen Environmental and Remote Sensing Center in Bergen, Norway. So I work with environmental study, remote sensing. So I have background in forestry, but now I'm mostly working with remote sensing and GIS. So, and the focus of our study is urban Arctic. So like, yes, people thinking that Arctic is not so inhabited, but actually 90% of our people live in the cities. And as we know, the cities have a big transformation, big effect on a local climate. So, and of course, yes, we see the bigger picture of climate, Arctic climate, or regional climate, but this changes on a regional and pan-Arctic scale can have very different effect at local scale due to such effects that are all not natural surfaces. Natural surfaces have different different physical parameters, and they're always warmer and drier. So, and so if we can switch to next slide, for example. Yes, this is just land surface temperature map. It's a satellite-based map of Fairbanks. So this basically land surface temperature tell us how warm is the surface if we will touch it by hand. So, and you see this is, of course, you probably well know the shape of Fairbanks, and you can see that urban areas or very artificial urban environment is much warmer than surrounding landscape. So, and if we can click on next slide, please. Yes, this is just a little bit bigger picture. So it's this farmer loop area, and you can see all like landfill and other areas. So they're warmer, and you can see even the shape of this warm areas is repeated the shape of disturbed and artificial surfaces. So this we see the road is much warmer. So, and of course that blue space is its original natural landscape, which have developed vegetation, which is kind of yes have a cooling effect. So, and this is kind of like we have see this traditional very contrast zone between artificial and natural surfaces. So, and when we're planning our infrastructure, so we have to be aware that when we build our place our infrastructure, so we have to be sure that nature have enough place to develop, enough place to live, that there is a certain corridors or buffer zones, so that so that infrastructure don't take extreme amount of space, because yes, I just read recently a paper, so it was published in Nature, that actually human development mass is already bigger than biosphere developed mass. So we have to kind of always consider that we should try to build less and build smart. So so that's probably my yeah. So what else we can do? Yes, of course, we transform this lens surface characteristics, because when we remove the vegetation, so it's also like we, especially if it's a ground based on permafrost, so we kind of remove this upper layer, which kind of make this keep the surface cool. So, and actually, especially in this area, like not far from Farmer Loop, there was some research done, and it was estimated that it actually was some test sites. It was built in 1947, I think, and it's just like was some research that after 36 years, we see a very deeper permafrost thawing after we remove the vegetation layer, cooling layer. So, and of course, it's we also observe that urban vegetation is much more developed. It's due to the warmer urban conditions. Plus, of course, because the surface layer was removed, all vegetation layer was removed, and surface get warmer as well. So this is kind of what the problems we have. So, okay, thank you. So can we go? So can we go further, please? Or in slides? So, and now we have some, yes, panelists. So they would like to talk about our some words about what they're doing. So it's Howard Epstein, please, and maybe you can tell us some words.
Okay, hi everybody. I guess I'm going first. I'm Howard Epstein. I'm a professor in environmental sciences at the University of Virginia, with 25 to 30 years of experience working in Arctic systems. I think I want to start this with just a caveat, and that is that I'm an ecologist, and so my most of my career I've spent working out in the tundra, away from Arctic cities, away from Arctic communities. I had done some work on community related projects, but nothing very extensive or continuous until a number of years ago, when the National Science Foundation started their Navigating the New Arctic program, which is one of several ideas of convergence research at the National Science Foundation. The idea there was to bring researchers together from different disciplines to work on important scientific problems. And so I'm a biophysical scientist, but I began collaborations with architects here at the University of Virginia, social scientists, even musicians, and other collaborators, engineers from different aspects of the federal government, and so that's how we started to do work in communities. Prior to our first big project, we held a conference here at the University of Virginia called Bridging Science, Art, and Community in the New Arctic. And that was a multidisciplinary conference that we held here. It brought together scientists and artists and community members, including our Arctic youth ambassadors, youth from Arctic Alaskan communities. And that sort of led us to this to our project that we began in 2021, which was called Examining Interactions Between the Built and Natural Environments in an Arctic Community. The core of that was developing an environmental sensor array in Utqiagvik, Alaska. The objectives of that project were the first one was to understand how urban system components interacted with their surrounding air, ground, and water conditions. We have strong collaborations with Matthew Joel and Lena Cho, who are architects here at the University of Virginia. They've been doing Arctic design for a number of years. So the second objective was to generate environmental design analyses and guidelines to address sustainable development in Utqiagvik. And then the third is a social science component to our project, which is actually a really unique aspect of our project, and Hannah Bradley is involved in that to a great degree. And that part of our project is to study how we collaborate in our research. So it's to study how our research team, which includes all of our partners in Utqiagvik and elsewhere, how we communicate across our disciplines and our cultures to work to produce knowledge. We have a really interdisciplinary research team, which poses some challenges, but also some serious benefits. So among the practitioners at the University of Virginia, we have environmental scientists, we have architects, the landscape architects, we have social scientists. We have two federal research lab partners. One is CREL, the Cold Regions Research and Engineering Laboratory, and then also NREL, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. They have a Cold Climate Housing Research Center. So those are our two federal partners. And then we have a number of community partners in Utqiagvik. They range from the North Slope Borough, so that's the borough government, to the Inupiat Community of Arctic Slope, that's the tribal government, to the city of Utqiagvik, that's the municipal government. Busey, which is the utilities co-op in Utqiagvik. Triben is a local consulting and grant acquiring group in Utqiagvik, and we've been working with them really closely. In addition to the TNHA, which is the Regional Housing Authority, and the local hospital, Samuel Simmons Memorial Hospital. So we have a wide range of collaborators on this project, which again has challenges and benefits. So a core of what we are working on is related to what Victoria mentioned, the idea that the idea that Utqiagvik, even a small town like Utqiagvik, generates an urban heat island, and we know this from work that was done by Ken Hinkle, Anna Kleen, and Fritz Nelson over a decade ago. They examined the urban heat island effect in Utqiagvik. But when you get down to the vulnerability of infrastructure in a community, it is it's a lot more complex than that. Okay, there are areas within a town that may be much warmer than the surrounding tundra, and there are even areas that are colder. That might be where permafrost might be more protected. So that just the fact that the city is an urban heat island doesn't mean that every place there is as vulnerable or is vulnerable. Some areas may be more vulnerable, some less vulnerable. And so that's sort of the key of what we were working on in Utqiagvik. We developed a measurement array with a variety of different techniques. We set up micrometeorological stations around different buildings in Utqiagvik. With the help from Krell, we conducted geophysics, so ground penetrating radar, electrical resistivity tomography, LIDAR, doing thaw depth probes. We sampled a variety of water bodies throughout town, looking for water conditions, indicators of permafrost thaw, with the idea that that ponds within a town might be what we call sentinels of degradation, that the ponds might sense permafrost degradation before other ecosystem components do. And so some of our local areas where we work, like I said, we worked at the hospital, a residential facility, around roads, around snow fences, and then out at the Barrow Environmental Observatory, which is our tundra control. And the idea is to look at the community in detail, to identify areas that are potentially vulnerable to permafrost degradation, air pollution, water quality issues, knowing that it's a very, very heterogeneous environment.
Mhm.
We have a new project that's being funded, and I'll wrap up in a minute or two. We have a new project that's being funded internally by the University of Virginia. One of the things that we noted in our work is that snow and surface water play a huge role in permafrost thermal regimes and vulnerability. And the idea that snow is moved around within a city environment, both by natural processes, wind and anthropogenic properties. So snow will accumulate on windward sides of buildings. But the community also moves snow around a lot. They're clearing roads, clearing culverts. So you end up with a very, very heterogeneous snow environment, which leads to a very heterogeneous surface water environment, which leads to a very heterogeneous thermal regime if you're considering permafrost conditions. And this is sort of where I know one of the questions was traditional and institutional knowledge. This is a big part of the project where traditional and institutional knowledge will play an important role. Okay. I should probably wrap up, but this new project is called Understanding and Managing Impacts of Snow and Water on Permafrost in Arctic Communities, and it combines traditional and institutional knowledge, field observations of snow conditions and ground thermal regimes, remote sensing of snow, and also hydrological modeling. And so the idea is to combine all of these to develop an understanding of snow and water patterns throughout Utqiagvik and potential effects on permafrost degradation. Ming Xiao mentioned that an erratic event that he did just the other day, that we don't have a digital twin of communities like these. And so in the absence of having a digital twin that we could just sort of manipulate manipulate conditions and see what's happening, we have to deploy all these other tools and techniques that we have at our disposal, like traditional knowledge, field sampling, remote sensing, and modeling. So I have a list of successes and challenges, but I'll save those for discussion.
Great. Thank you, Hoy.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Very nice. Yes, especially about this heterogeneity and micro effect. Actually,
Yeah.
yes, it's really kind of. I'm very happy that it's start to realize and just like recognize that it's very important that just like to find what will be changes in this particular place. I mean, where somebody's house place, for example, or people go hunting and that area, for example. Yes. So. Can we go to Rebekah maybe next?
Ublalotak, Uvinga Agnorak, Kikik Rich me, Ferguson me. Good morning. My name is Rebekah Arnold, born and raised in Kotzebue, Alaska. And my family is the Rich family and the Ferguson family there in the Kotzebue area. You can see on this slide, I'm also a proud member of the Native Village of Kotzebue Tribe, an advocate for the inclusion of Indigenous perspectives in the conversation surrounding Arctic infrastructure. Born and raised in Kotzebue, like I had mentioned, I'm of Inuit descent and dedicated my career to representing the voices of my community in areas of education, business, and Indigenous engagement. I earned my BA in Business Administration Management from Fort Lewis College in Durango, Colorado. And I'm currently pursuing my MBA in Finance here in Alaska Pacific University. So in doing kind of our introduction, that kind of gives you an idea. Again, you can read more on the side of who I am. Thank you so much for having me today. I kind of wanted to start off in kind of a non-traditional kind of way, in the sense that I want to have a moment of silence for Bearing Air 445, which that community, we had lost that airplane and 10 of the folks on board, affecting the communities of Unalakleet, Nome, Wasilla, and Anchorage, and all of kind of Alaska. So if we can just kind of take just a moment. I know we are running short on my time here, but I would love for that moment. So it's usually, a longer period of time, but again, we're kind of here on a short webinar. So thanks for letting me start off that way. Growing up in our smaller community, you can see how everything is interconnected, from the people, the things, the places, the infrastructure. So a lot of different relationality in that. So thanks for, again, having me start off with that kind of untraditional kind of starting honoring those people that we have lost that really affected our community and our communities. Let's see, did you want me to get into some of those questions that we have, or are we going to go ahead and have kind of a round, or how would you like?
I don't know. We can, because like Hovi actually like Hobbit, he kind of responds for this first question very well, which is kind of was kind of how science can help to plan or wisely plan the infrastructure. So this is kind of like here's this specific kind of analysis of the area. I mean, just like which is more one sensitive to this infrastructure built in or less sensitive. So this is, I think, is kind of very kind of nice. And yes, and of course you say like you lived in close communities, that is of course and small communities. It would be interesting to see how you see this infrastructure built, how it's affect your life. I mean, just and how you can maybe help to build it in a proper and smarter way, or how you can just like maybe reject it's to be built and just like place in different place, or make smaller, or just do some adjustment, make it that it won't be so harmful for the area where you live. So this is maybe would be a good question for you. So thank you.
Great. So I've got some notes here, so I'll be looking down at some of my notes. Thanks for kind of clarifying that as well, Victoria. And we have the first kind of question: how can Arctic infrastructure be designed to endure permafrost thaw and shifting ground conditions while minimizing environmental impact? And how can research on environmental change inform these designs? So it feels kind of like this loaded question. My husband is actually one of the architects who had worked on the Samuel Simmons Memorial Hospital in Utqiagvik. And he still travels there once in a while to go and check on the building itself. So he's an architect, with the expertise in Arctic infrastructure as well. So kind of having this perspective as well. So I was, relaying information and going back and forth with my husband on this. And it comes down to kind of not as a complex response or answer than I thought. I thought, oh man, this is such a huge, complex problem with all of these, there's so many different ways to think about this. But one of the simple answers that, we talked about was a better foundation. So having deeper pile foundations to accommodate the changing soil conditions in the permafrost. So the permafrost shifting and swaying, they put in these large piles in there to help keep it cool underground so it doesn't shift as much. And over the last 50 years, these structures have changed and shifted, causing, some of these buildings to kind of move around or creating a lot more challenges in looking at the area. So it costs more money to get better infrastructure, better materials these days. But since it has been, past 50 years, the old systems, they're not as good anymore. So really having to think about the materials in these different areas and how do we use these infrastructures in a sustainable way. There's definitely notes as well on looking at, trends and the climate and the shifting and things. There's another project, Permafrost Discovery Gateway, where you can see the permafrost polygons and where they are and how they're shifting and changing. So that is one of the tools that folks can kind of use. And it's an interesting kind of when you backtrack or think about Alaska. So Alaska specific, not for the whole Arctic and Arctic infrastructure, but when they had the state of Alaska, Alaskans and the people weren't allowed to purchase property or land or plots. They weren't considered citizens until I can't remember the dates, but we had homesteaders come into Alaska. They were able to purchase land, but again, the Alaska Natives were not. And then they had the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. And they had told the indigenous people there to go and find a permanent place. So a lot of the places that our people inhabit now weren't necessarily like first choice. They may have been, let's say, a fish camp, so a temporary place, and they were kind of forced to have it as a permanent place. And again, I don't want to speak for all of our people, but when we think about infrastructure and challenges, then one of the questions that that I see is, well, why would you build on this unstable ground? And it's a little bit more complex. A lot of these probably weren't by choice. We probably did not choose to have a permanent dwelling in this area. But now we have all of these different challenges. So now we have to do those research, do the tool or use the tools to help in observing the different areas that we now inhabit. Some strategies we talked about doing kind of the mapping, looking up permafrost polygons and kind of where they're at, deeper foundation and a larger structure above the ground. You can have better clearance above the ground to allow natural habitat migrations. So that's, again, a part of the larger ecosystem when we're trying not to disturb the migration patterns or having that disturbance on the natural environment. And one more kind of note here, what ways can Indigenous knowledge and environmental research be integrated with modern? Just really having those conversations and doing kind of that research. There's a lot of research that can be done, but I feel like a lot of the modern research is kind of limited. I feel like with Indigenous knowledge, you have thousands and thousands of years of knowledge that has been kind of passed down as well. So definitely tapping in and having that co-production of knowledge, being able to have those seats available and listening to the folks of that area to help make those decisions for the people who are living in these areas. So that's kind of where I'll take a pause. Thank you so much. And I look forward to kind of chatting a little bit more.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yes, it's yeah, I think it's very interesting kind of way how to look at the I mean what are local people thinking and what is science thinking. Yes, yeah, of course, yes. Why probably now we turn to the local knowledge, yes, because this local knowledge was oriented how the people can survive in this environment, not just understand how things works. So, and this is now where I realize that we also need these knowledges. So we need knowledges which will help us to survive. So this is actually a very good point. Thanks, Rebekah. Yes. So, and can we go to our third, David?
Sure. Thanks for having me. This is great.
Yes. Okay. Hi, David. Sorry, I didn't notice you wanted to. Okay. So
Yeah, fascinating conversation. Yeah, so I'm David Fuente. I'm at the School of the Environment at the University of South Carolina. It's nice because I'm a slightly different background than the other folks on the panel. So I'm an applied economist and planner, work mostly on the economics of water and sanitation service delivery. The vast majority of my work is outside of the US, and increasingly in large megacities. But I have been working on water and sanitation issues with Alaska Native communities for about 7 to 10 years. It's a nice break from megacities in East and West Africa. Totally different part of my brain that I get to use. But it's an exciting place to work, right? The challenges are pressing. I think from a climate and environmental change perspective, things are moving very fast, right? So the communities are kind of right at the tip of the climate spear to some extent. And also, there's just a lot of federal support for infrastructure and projects that you don't see in other places, right? So I think it's critically important. I'm excited you guys have convened this group to talk about it. So I'll just tick through the questions that you asked, right? So the first question focused specifically on Arctic infrastructure, right? I'll hit the first and the last question. The middle question on ecosystems, I'll leave that to Howard and others. I don't deal much with with the environmental side of it anymore. Past life I used to. But how can we, design infrastructure that's kind of resilient to permafrost in addition to other climate-related threats is a big question, particularly in the context of water, right? So in the US, Alaska Native populations are the population that kind of has the most significant lack of access to piped water and sanitation services, right? So in my field, we refer to that as plumbing poverty. So it's critically important there. From a policy perspective, in the new infrastructure bill, the government put about $2 billion on the table to ensure that Alaska Native communities gain access to piped water and sanitation services, right? So that's really good news. A real challenge is how to build that infrastructure so that it's resilient to climate change, right? So these are very expensive systems in remote communities that are, I think permafrost is probably among the most pressing threat to the infrastructure. My hope is that with the new infrastructure investments in communities, they're being designed in a way that takes into account a potentially rapidly changing permafrost future, right? I think it's a real disaster for communities if we build expensive piped infrastructure and it doesn't manage shifting ground very well, right? We'll have very expensive systems that don't last very long. So I think it's critically important that we get the best permafrost science into the hands of the engineers and architects, Rebekah, who are designing these systems to ensure that this infrastructure has enduring impact that I think we all hope it has in these communities, right? So in my world, it's fundamentally important. I think shifting landscape of permafrost brings two fundamental challenges for me. First is how we think about the design of infrastructure, right? So designing infrastructure so that it's both resistant to change or resilient to change, but also potentially that it's compartmental, right? It could be moved if needed, right? There may be situations in which communities are asked to move, and it would be nice if the infrastructure could follow them. I also think it requires a change in thinking about how we think about the economics of these systems, right? Investing in infrastructure that's resilient to permafrost is going to be more expensive, right? But if we're using the tools of decision making under uncertainty, thinking about a non-stationary future, building quote unquote more expensive infrastructure that's resilient to change makes a lot of economic sense, right? So part of what I do is try to help build economic arguments for investing in resilient infrastructure for communities, right? So using the tools of economics to show policymakers and to some extent academics that expensive investments can really have strong payoffs, particularly if we think about life in an uncertain world. Good news is these tools exist, right? The economics of decision making under uncertainty, these tools have been around for about 20 years. In the global water sector, we haven't been good about implementing them to think about infrastructure investments and investment portfolios. So globally, this is work I've been doing with the World Bank and the World Bank staff. I think we also need to do it in the US, right? We need to build a compelling economic rationale for investing in resilient infrastructure. We have those tools, and I think we need to be careful about how we implement them, and I think a little bit front-footed, right? We need to make the case that these are smart investments for the country, right? They might be expensive, but they're smart, and we can do that using the tools of economics. On environmental change, I've been working on an NNA project for the past few years. And one of the things that's inspired me about the NNA community, one, obviously, that it's interdisciplinary, but two, the broad swath of activities that are happening. Permafrost is obviously one space in which there's a lot of activity across projects. One thing I haven't seen, at least I haven't been engaged in, is more work on trying to integrate the activities that are happening across projects. My sense is that the NNA program has generated a tremendous amount of interesting and important research. I know I'm too busy to plug into all of it, right? But I think there's a real opportunity here, particularly as we face maybe a pause in federal funding, to think about how we leverage the activities we've been doing across all of our grants to not only kind of bolster the current state of science, but to think carefully about how we can use this work to benefit communities, right? So how can we leverage all this cutting edge science to do a better job of things like infrastructure investments, infrastructure design? I think as part of the NNA community, for those of us who are a part of it, I think there's an opportunity here. I'm excited to be part of it as things potentially slow down a little. But there's not much incentive, right? As academics, we kind of face the incentive to move on to the next grant and not think carefully about how to make it relevant for practice, or even integrate with what others are doing. So just a shout out to us to maybe pause and take stock. So there, and then just one other piece on Indigenous knowledge and how we can better leverage environmental research and engineering practice. This is an open question for me, right? I hope we have engineers on the call. But I'd be very interested to know in what ways Indigenous knowledge and some of our environmental research is actually being integrated into engineering practice, right? I haven't seen a tremendous amount of evidence in the water sector, though I need to look more carefully. But I do wonder if there's other sectors, infrastructure sectors, that are actually doing a very good job integrating either Indigenous knowledge or cutting edge environmental research in what they're doing. Might be architecture, could be roads, could be energy. But I think that's an empirical question, right? How well are we doing right now? Not clear to me. My hypothesis is not so well, right? Lots of room for improvement. So that seems critically important. I think on one hand, we should do a better job because it's important for understanding people's preferences, right? What do people actually want and value? As engineers or economists, certainly folks in the lower 48, I think it's easy to make assumptions about what communities want and value. I think we could probably do a better job about understanding their preferences and letting them lead on the infrastructure investments. It's not something that's typically happening. And then, I'm interested in thinking about how we can create space for engaging engineering practice, right? So engineers, the folks who are out there designing systems, they're on contract, they are hustling, they are designing, they are submitting reports for approval so they can start building, right? So an open question for me is, are engineers interested in integrating indigenous knowledge or cutting edge environmental research into their practice? If they are, fantastic. But what are the incentives that they face, and how can we address the incentives that they face that might prevent them from engaging kind of more systematically? So that's one question. Are the engineers interested, and do they face the right incentives? I think another question is, are academics interested, and do we face the right incentives? I think some academics might be interested, but the incentives we face aren't necessarily well aligned for spending a lot of time engaging with professional engineers to improve their practice, unless you're in an engineering department, right? So I think we could think a little bit about how we can change the incentives we face in academia to engage more with engineering practice, even if it's Howard as an ecologist or me as an economist. What role can we play in engaging that? And then just two other kind of flags there. Are funders interested, right? If we would maybe want to make a case that engineering practice should include indigenous knowledge or cutting edge environmental research, what role can funders play, right? In the water infrastructure world, funders have to sign off on engineering reports, right? They set the specs for what counts as a valid engineering report. That might be a way to encourage the actual engineering firms to do a better job of engaging indigenous knowledge and cutting edge environmental research. And then the last piece is, are communities interested, right? I think often we assume that communities are very interested in being involved. May or may not be the case. I would typically advocate for one, finding ways to compensate them, right, for their indigenous knowledge, right? If they're going to be involved and engineering firms are going to ask them to provide that knowledge in the design phase, I think we should be forward-looking about compensating for that knowledge. But also we might think about creating tools for community advocacy, right? Oftentimes when infrastructure is being built, there'll be a required community meeting to either talk about the project or solicit community feedback. I think the extent to which that is done well is pretty variable, but there might be an opportunity to provide tools for communities, right? Just to highlight things they might ask about in the design phase of different types of infrastructure, energy, water, roads, in terms of advocating for infrastructure that's resilient to change, right? Particularly based on their own knowledge of rates of change. So I'll pause there. I think this is critically important. I'm glad you guys have pulled the group together to talk about it. I'm excited to hear what everyone and Rebekah and Howard have to say.
Yeah, it's very, very good thoughts. Yes. So actually, yeah, probably we need to think, I mean, just like what's the missing when we kind of develop a design, some infrastructure project and try to build it. And actually, so yeah, we have experience from some big projects, like for example, this Norilsk, when this oil tank was throw a lot of oil in the rivers because the permafrost was thawing. So we have example in Sweden, in Kiruna, when entire city was replaced because again was kind of like ground or instability. So we just like have to kind of like really kind of like think what is done now. Like, yes, okay, so what we invest, is it economically profitable just to build this infrastructure, or we really kind of calculate all environmental impact which will be caused? And plus, of course, we shouldn't forget that it's land actually where people live, like indigenous people. And of course, again, like example from Norway, we have this wind turbines built in Sami's land, and it was a big scandal. So the Sami didn't like it, and just like so they asked to remove these turbines because it just like interfere with reindeer. So this is just like again the question. So what we should consider. What is most important years, of course, yes, and important years for researchers. So do we need to do the people who plan and build and design infrastructure should be kind of more anyway based on researcher and needs for the people live in that area. So instead of just like following only economical reason for infrastructure to be built. So.
Like we have some questions.
Yeah, the question is kind of like what are kind of are missing when we develop a design infrastructure. So just like is economical factor. Yes, we know that it's very profitable to build as much as possible, and now like we look in many kind of places in Arctic, so the infrastructure going to be developed, and we'll look at Alaska, we'll look at Scandinavia, Fennoscandia, so it's just like a lot of cities because a lot of resources, and we see that it will be developed more and more. And do research do enough just like to show how this build of infrastructure can be harmful for these fragile ecosystems, actually, for the vegetation, for the animals, and for the people also who live in that area and depend on all these ecosystems. So.
I think what Howard was saying is that it looks like two people have their hands up. Do we
Well,
want to
sorry.
do
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca.
questions in the chat, or do we want to have them kind of speak up?
It's not.
Suhail and Peter have their hands raised.
Hello. Hello, Victoria and Howard, sir. Actually, my name is Suhail, and I've done bachelor's in geography majors in Earth observation. So, I'm currently doing master's in disaster management related to policy and working on the geohazards. So, my question was with the David, sir, and like while you were saying, with the knowledge of how do we connect with the engineers with the indigenous people? So I want to know, like, while these people are working on the projects, so do they have any policy and plan, or while making policy and plan, do they include the indigenous people, like while they are working on projects on those areas? How does it work? Like, is there any policy or plan before working on those projects?
You're talking about the engineers who are going to build infrastructure.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I think that depends on the sector and the projects, right? And so I can only speak for my limited window into water and sanitation projects that are
Mm-hmm.
funded through federal means. My understanding is that there's requirements for the engineers to go out, to have community meetings, not only to solicit feedback from the communities about kind of what they know about previous systems, to tell them about the projects, but then also to return to the communities once they have preliminary designs to
Mm-hmm.
allow the communities to have input on options. I think in the water projects I've seen, they typically would lay out 3 to 4 different options, and the communities are asked to weigh in on those options. So there's requirements for engineering firms in the water sector to engage with communities for federally funded projects. I think the extent to which that's done well and worse varies firm by firm, right?
Yeah.
So, but I can't speak for other sectors, energy, roads, airports, housing. So if anyone else has insight into that,
It
that
is.
would be useful.
It is like overall aim is to like achieve all those 17 SDGs, right? So this question, like, well, Rebecca was asking from you, so at that time I thought this question.
Right. I
Thank you
think
for
that's a
answering.
good question. I'll kind of jump in as well. David had pointed out, with these community meetings and all these things when it comes to infrastructure, that's kind of all over with, the US and like urban or rural areas. If you have a large infrastructure project, then you have to have those community meetings. When you're thinking about specific Indigenous communities and how you engage them, that one's a little bit more of an interesting question to me because it's harder to answer because a lot of these indigenous peoples are part of the community. So you're already having their kind of input or their kind of perspective. And thinking about like a more niche thing, it's kind of harder for me to really think about how do you engage. We do have this kind of class here at Alaska Pacific University. Arctic research is relationship. Our people are very much relationship centered. We have seen a lot of projects that come and go, a lot of people that come into our communities with best of intentions. They have short-term projects, short-term things. They don't make the relationship and then they kind of leave. So it really is about building that relationship and really having that quality kind of conversation, that dialogue, and really seeing, like David had said, well, what do communities want and what do communities value? Instead of coming in and telling the community, this is what you need, this is how you're going to do it. So I'll take a pause there, and it looks like, did you have anything else to add, Howard?
Yeah, sure. I'll add a few points. And this is coming from a research perspective, a science research perspective, and maybe also from the perspective of Utqiagvik, which is the community that we're working in northern Alaska. Largely indigenous population of about 4,500 to 5,000 people. The Utqiagvik is a unique situation because they have a very long history of science being conducted there. They just recently celebrated their 75th anniversary of science being conducted in Utqiagvik. Some of that was very positive. Some of that was negative. Some of that was positive. They've had good experiences and bad experiences. And well, there's also a very prominent science logistics corporation, the Utqiagvik Inupiat Corporation, that provides science logistics for research. So it's a community that has supported science research for a long time. The whole idea of the Navigating the New Arctic program was co-production of knowledge, whether you like the term or not. It's just it's the idea of collaborating, large collaborations with community partners in a very a way that promotes equality of all participants. And I think we've tried to do that. I think we have a I think really nice relationship with our community partners and with the community of Utqiagvik. We visit every summer, multiple times every summer. We go for an Ilukatuk, the whaling celebration, which is a great experience for us. But I would just echo one thing that David said, the big sticking point for us is time, getting the time commitment from our community partners. And the reason that is a problem is because our job is to do research, and they have jobs, they have full-time jobs. So we have to be compensating our community partners, but we also have to compensate them in a way that we actually have to hire people, like whether it's 50% commitment, full-time commitment, but we have to hire people on our project. We have to hire community partners on our projects so that they're actually active, paid participants in the project. It's really hard to say, oh, we're having a project meeting. Can you all leave your jobs and come meet with us? That doesn't work that well. So we have to think about different ways of doing this. And maybe we'll take Peter's question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for your interesting presentations and for this stimulating discussion. So I'm Peter Schweitzer, anthropologist at the University of Vienna and a former resident of Alaska. I will also stick to the Alaskan side of the discussion for now, because I think all of us on this call, or certainly most of us, would agree that the future of Arctic infrastructure should be closely tied to community interests and community needs, and which hasn't been the case in the past necessarily. But now, let's talk about the orange elephant in the room. we have a new administration that doesn't seem to for example, we heard we have regulations how you need to do certain things in terms of everywhere over the United States. There seems to be tendencies to do away with most regulations if possible. There is a tendency to kind of not invest in community well-being, but only in resource extraction. So I don't want to paint too dark a picture, but the question is, at this point in in history, I think we have lots of good ideas, but we seem to be facing a rather hostile political environment. And the question is for me also, what can be done despite this environment? I know it's a tough one.
I'm excited to kind of answer this. I'm going to
Go
jump in
for it,
here.
Rebekah.
So it reminds me of that meme, where you look over and you're like, oh, is this your first time? Alaska Native peoples here have been here for a long time. And again, speaking from the Alaska Native perspective, we have our Alaska Native tribes, and our tribes, they're not and like ethnic designation. We're actually a kind of legal. So there's a tribal to tribal government to government relation that we have. So I would, encourage those of you who have not already, or if you are connected with the tribes, to connect with the tribes. So again, a government to government relationship is kind of what we have, although there are a lot of challenges there, and I'm not going to go into them, but there are ways to kind of keep moving forward and keeping these kind of infrastructure ideas and keeping the connections with the community. So great question.
Thank you.
I don't have much here. I think I agree it's a challenging time in thinking about regulations. But I don't think this will always be like this. And I think from just a strategic perspective, I think both sides of the aisle, even before the current kind of change in how Washington seems to be functioning, my sense is that for infrastructure, both sides of the rational aisle want to have confidence that the government is making investments that are going to have lasting impacts, right? That's a good deal for the American taxpayer. And I think the extent to which we can argue that infrastructure that is resilient to rates of environmental change is a smart deal for US taxpayers, I think that'll resonate across the political spectrum, right? I don't think anyone wants to throw money down the drain, right? Especially those who are concerned about the fiscal state of affairs, right? If we're going to make infrastructure investments, they should be resilient to change, right? At the end of the day, that actually just means more money in the hands of engineering firms, right? It means better services for communities, but the money's just flowing to engineering firms, right? So it's not politically that hard of an argument to make, I think, if you strip away some of the normative aspects of it. It's just advocating for a better deal for taxpayers.
Well, the only thing I will add to that is that there is a substantive fraction of the Inflation Reduction Act funding that is targeted for Alaska and Alaskan communities, and I think, and it remains to be seen what is going to happen to those dollars. And you're right, Peter. That's going to be a political game. And David, you're also right. It will come down to what folks think are, it's a good, what folks think is a good use of taxpayer dollars.
Happy to hear that there's slight optimism.
Yes, so we should think about money here, but unfortunately, yes, if we build something, it's especially in the Arctic, so we cannot remove it anymore. So we have a good example from Russian cities, which is uninhabited now, But actually, there is some research. Even this empty ghost cities, they still changing environment. I mean, so they still kind of warmer, so they have different microclimate. Even nobody lives there. So yes, so we have to be very wise and very creative when we build something, especially in the Arctic. So. And so here's some comment from Stanislav. Yes, he said that indigenous knowledge is critical in building infrastructure in villages because indigenous people know better the area and they have been living there for millennia. And some policy, of course, makers, they don't realize this. So this is just like, yes. So we need to be very careful. And of course, it's combination of economy, research, and indigenous knowledge. So this is kind of have to be kind of all combined. So
I just wanted to thank everyone for productive, insightful discussion and optimism despite of everything. And we do hope that we will continue our project, and we have some plans for the future. And here on your screen, you can see that our next webinar is scheduled on March 3rd. It will be led by James Temte and focused on arts and humanities in infrastructure research. And those who plan to attend Arctic Science Summit Week, I invite to the events that we are highlighting. First of all, on March 20th, we have community meeting on research priorities on infrastructure futures from community perspectives. And we are bringing knowledge holders, and we hope that it will be an opportunity to discuss more in detail and deeper how communities perceive infrastructure research and how we can together contribute to identifying research priorities for infrastructure research. And then together with RATIC group on March 24th, participate in IASC workshop planning for the next decade in Arctic infrastructure research and contribute to white paper. And also we have a session on challenges of Arctic infrastructure where many of participants of this webinar are involved. And we do hope that we will have knowledge sharing gathering in Battle in the fall 2025. So stay tuned and hope to see you all soon. And if anyone have more questions, we can keep our Zoom open for next few minutes.
I actually have a question regarding the registration for the upcoming webinars. Actually, this was the first time I came to know about craft webinars, and I came through the Arcus community, Arctic community. So can you please share the website or anything, the group which you have, so that we can register for those upcoming webinars and can join them?
Yeah, we usually announce them on Arcus and IRPIC. But I think since you registered for this one, you automatically registered for the following ones. But if you have any issues, please let me know. And probably Wilma can tell more about technical part of that.
Okay.
I'm gonna share the Facebook group here so he can join and then get updates.
Oh yeah, that will be perfect.
Rebecca, the Samuel Simmons Memorial Hospital is an exquisite building, so your husband did a phenomenal job there. If I'm not mistaken, those pilings are deeper than anything else in Utqiagvik, I think. I think they go really, really deep.
Yeah, I think so. And he helped with like the design, like ending part of the first hospital, but he's working on improvements now at his same
Yeah.
company. So it's really cool to see. And yeah, really
It
great.
is a really nice building. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll pass that along. Thank you,
Yeah.
Howard. Thank you for having us today. And yeah, looking at the chat here. I don't see any other questions, but I'll hang out here for a little bit.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I need to leave, but thank you
Okay,
very
we're not live on Facebook now. It's just us.
All right. Thank you all so
All
much.
right.
And have a great day.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It was nice.